My sister wanted to take advantage of me when I needed help, only to find out later that Emma's return home was not the warm reunion she had once envisioned. As a freelance designer, her career had flourished in its early years, allowing her to live comfortably in the city. But the economic downturn had decimated her client base, and soon, the debts began to pile up. Rent was overdue, her savings dwindled, and every new day brought more rejection emails. After months of clinging to an unsustainable life, Emma reluctantly packed her belongings and moved back to her parents' suburban home, a decision that bruised her pride in ways she hadn't anticipated. But what awaited her wasn't solace or familial comfort, it was Jessica. Her older sister, who had never left home and seemed to thrive in the safety net of their parents' stability, had already carved out her place as the self-appointed matriarch of the household. Jessica worked as an accountant, her life meticulously planned, her routines rigid and dependable. From the moment Emma arrived with her mismatched luggage and palpable sense of failure, Jessica made no attempt to hide her disapproval. "Didn't think we'd see you back here so soon," Jessica remarked during Emma's first evening at home, her tone layered with mock surprise. Emma forced a smile, but the words stung. The house was Jessica's domain now, her kingdom of stability and order, and Emma felt like an unwelcome guest who disrupted the balance. From the outset, their personalities clashed. Emma's life had always been marked by creativity and spontaneity, a chaotic energy that allowed her to jump from one passion project to the next. Jessica, by contrast, was methodical to the point of rigidity, priding herself on her discipline and practical decisions. To Jessica, Emma was the embodiment of irresponsibility, a reckless dreamer whose inability to plan ahead had landed her back under their parents' roof. And to Emma, Jessica was a judgmental perfectionist, more concerned with being right than being kind. The shared space became a battlefield for their unspoken resentment. Jessica's need for control clashed with Emma's desperate attempts to reclaim her independence. Their first fight came less than a week after Emma moved in. Jessica, irritated by Emma's scattered belongings strewn across the living room, had approached her with thinly veiled hostility. "You can't just leave your stuff everywhere. This isn't some bohemian loft where chaos is an aesthetic," Jessica snapped. Emma bristled, biting back a defensive retort. "I didn't realize you were running a museum here. Don't worry, I'll put it away." "It's not about me, Emma. It's about respect," Jessica retorted, her words sharp and deliberate. "Mom and Dad might let you treat this place like your personal storage unit, but I won't." The exchange ended with Emma storming off to the guest room, the room Jessica referred to as the storage room before Emma's return. It was small, cramped, and filled with Jessica's organized boxes of holiday decorations and old tax records, a constant reminder that Emma's presence was temporary. Even their parents, though well-meaning, inadvertently fueled the tension. Emma sensed their disappointment in her unspoken sighs and overly polite inquiries about her future plans. Her father's forced optimism, "You'll get back on your feet in no time, kiddo," felt like a thinly veiled plea for reassurance. Her mother, though more empathetic, often seemed to tiptoe around Jessica's moods, unwilling to upset the balance of the household. Jessica, however, was unyielding in her critique. She took every opportunity to point out Emma's failures, often disguised as well-intentioned advice. "Have you thought about taking a course in bookkeeping? It's stable, and you wouldn't have to worry about chasing clients," Jessica suggested one morning over breakfast, her tone smug. Emma clenched her jaw, staring at her bowl of cereal. "Thanks for the advice, Jessica, but I think I'll figure it out on my own." "Sure," Jessica replied, her voice dripping with condescension. "Because figuring it out has worked so well for you so far." The humiliation of living under Jessica's scrutiny began to wear on Emma. Every missed job opportunity, every failed attempt to rebuild her career, felt amplified by Jessica's judgmental presence. When Emma applied for a graphic design position at a local company and didn't hear back, Jessica wasted no time in offering her unsolicited analysis. "Maybe your portfolio isn't as strong as you think," Jessica said one evening as they sat in the living room, Emma scrolling through job boards on her laptop. Emma's face burned with anger. "Or maybe the job market is just terrible right now," she shot back. "Right. It's always someone else's fault," Jessica muttered under her breath. Their parents tried to mediate, but their efforts often backfired. "Jessica's just trying to help, Emma," their mother would say, as if Jessica's criticism was an act of kindness. To Emma, it felt more like Jessica was reveling in her failure, using every opportunity to assert her superiority. Jessica, on the other hand, was growing increasingly frustrated with Emma's presence. In her mind, Emma had always been the favorite, the carefree, artistic one who never had to follow the rules. Now, seeing Emma struggle, Jessica felt vindicated. But she also resented having to share her space and deal with what she saw as Emma's inability to take responsibility for her life. Their fights became more frequent and more volatile. Emma accused Jessica of being a control freak, while Jessica fired back with accusations of laziness and entitlement. The tension was palpable, infecting every corner of the house. Even small things became sources of conflict. When Emma left dishes in the sink, Jessica would make a point of washing them with exaggerated irritation. When Jessica worked late and came home to find Emma watching TV, she would make a pointed comment about how some of us have jobs to go to. For Emma, the humiliation of being dependent on her parents and enduring Jessica's constant judgment was almost too much to bear. She often retreated to her room, trying to drown out the noise of Jessica's criticisms and her own feelings of inadequacy. But the walls of the house seemed to close in on her, each day a reminder of how far she had fallen and how little her family seemed to believe in her ability to rise again. And Jessica, for all her self-assuredness, couldn't shake the irritation that Emma's presence brought. To her, Emma was a symbol of chaos, a disruption to the stable, predictable life she had worked so hard to maintain. Though she didn't say it aloud, a part of Jessica relished seeing Emma struggle. It confirmed everything she had always believed about her sister, that Emma was reckless, irresponsible, and incapable of living a stable life. The house, once a place of comfort, had become a pressure cooker of resentment and unspoken tensions. Emma and Jessica's relationship, already fraught with childhood rivalries, now teetered on the brink of collapse, each sister unable to see the humanity behind the other's flaws. The house was unnervingly quiet that afternoon, the air thick with the kind of tension that could only come from years of sibling rivalry boiling over. Emma had just returned from an afternoon walk, her mood already sour after another rejection email for a freelance gig. She stepped into the kitchen to find Jessica standing by the sink, cleaning up after lunch with her signature heavy-handed energy. The clang of dishes sounded more accusatory than usual. Jessica barely looked up as Emma entered, but the silence was anything but neutral. Emma knew it was only a matter of time before Jessica found a way to make her feel small again. Sure enough, as Emma reached for a glass of water, Jessica broke the silence. "You know," Jessica began, her tone laced with condescension, "if you spent as much time looking for a real job as you do on these pointless walks, maybe you wouldn't be stuck in this situation." Emma froze, the glass trembling slightly in her hand. She felt the anger rise in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I'm not in the mood for one of your lectures today, Jessica." Jessica turned to face her, arms crossed. "It's not a lecture, Emma. It's called being realistic. You've been here for months and nothing's changed. At what point are you going to stop blaming the economy and start taking responsibility?" Emma slammed the glass onto the counter, the sound reverberating through the room. "You have no idea what I'm going through, Jessica. It's easy for you to sit there and judge when you've never taken a risk in your entire life. You've just stayed here, hiding behind your spreadsheets and your rules, pretending like that's some great accomplishment." Jessica's face flushed with anger. "And what's your accomplishment, Emma? Running away to chase some delusional dream and then crawling back here when it all falls apart? Do you even hear yourself? You've been reckless your entire life, and now everyone else has to clean up your mess." Emma's voice rose, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "You're not cleaning up anything. You're just standing there, acting like you're better than me because you've never done anything outside your comfort zone. You think that makes you superior? No, Jessica, it just makes you a coward." The room felt like it was vibrating with the force of their argument. Their mother appeared in the doorway, her face etched with concern, but neither sister acknowledged her. The gloves were off, and neither Emma nor Jessica was willing to back down. Jessica took a step closer, her voice colder than Emma had ever heard it. "At least I'm not a selfish, irresponsible leech. You've been nothing but a burden since the day you came back, and honestly, everyone here is tired of walking on eggshells around you." Emma's cheeks burned with humiliation. She opened her mouth to respond but couldn't find the words. Instead, she stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door to her room so hard the walls seemed to shake. But the fight didn't end there. Jessica had always been thorough, and this time, her frustration with Emma led her to dig deeper. That evening, while scrolling through the internet, Jessica stumbled across a website selling self-help guides under a pseudonym she instantly recognized as Emma's. The guides were poorly written, filled with generic advice and typos, but what made Jessica's stomach turn was the realization that Emma was charging exorbitant prices for them. Jessica couldn't believe what she was seeing. "This is what she's been doing all day?" Jessica muttered to herself, her voice dripping with contempt. She clicked through the website, noting the inflated testimonials and the obviously fake credentials Emma had listed. It was one thing to struggle, Jessica thought, but this was embarrassing and unethical. The discovery lit a fire in Jessica, her frustration with Emma now reaching a breaking point. But it wasn't until a few days later, when Jessica was organizing old emails on the family's shared computer, that she stumbled across something that made her blood run cold. Among the messages was a folder labeled Old Stuff, and inside it were emails between Emma and Eric, Jessica's ex-boyfriend. Jessica's hands trembled as she read through the messages. They were flirty, intimate, and unmistakably clear. Emma had been involved with Eric while Jessica was still dating him. Jessica's mind raced, memories of her relationship with Eric now clouded by the realization that her own sister had betrayed her. Every argument, every insecurity she had felt during that time, suddenly made sense. Emma had been the reason it all fell apart. Jessica stormed upstairs, bursting into Emma's room without knocking. Emma looked up from her laptop, startled. "What now?" she snapped. Jessica held up her phone, the emails glaring back at her like evidence in a courtroom. "Care to explain this?" Emma's face drained of color as she realized what Jessica had found. She tried to play it off, but her voice faltered. "Jessica, that was years ago. It didn't mean anything." "It didn't mean anything?" Jessica's voice was shaking, a mix of fury and hurt. "You had a fling with my boyfriend while we were still together, and you're telling me it didn't mean anything?" "It wasn't like that," Emma tried to explain, but Jessica cut her off. "Don't you dare try to justify this," Jessica hissed. "You've always been selfish, Emma, but this is a new low, even for you." Emma stood, her own anger now bubbling to the surface. "You don't understand." "No, I understand perfectly," Jessica interrupted. "You couldn't stand seeing me happy, so you had to ruin it. Just like you ruin everything else." The argument escalated quickly, each sister hurling accusations that had been simmering for years. Emma accused Jessica of being cold and controlling, of always holding her failures over her head. Jessica fired back, calling Emma reckless, selfish, and a liar who had never taken accountability for anything in her life. Their parents tried to intervene, but it was no use. The wounds were too deep, the anger too raw. By the time the shouting match ended, Emma had made up her mind. She packed her belongings that night, leaving the house without saying goodbye. The humiliation of staying, of facing Jessica's scorn every day, was more than she could bear. The aftermath of Emma's departure left the family in shambles. Jessica, once the anchor of the household, became more withdrawn, her anger hardening into a cold detachment. She stopped engaging with family discussions, retreating into her work and refusing to talk about Emma. Their parents, caught in the middle, struggled to reconcile their daughter's fractured relationship, but their efforts only seemed to push Jessica further away. As for Emma, she moved into a tiny apartment on the outskirts of the city, determined to start fresh but haunted by the fallout. She avoided her family, unwilling to face the shame and unresolved anger that lingered between her and Jessica. The fracture between the sisters was irreversible, their relationship reduced to silence and avoidance. The house they had grown up in felt emptier, colder, as if the echoes of their final argument still lingered in the air. And though life went on, neither Jessica nor Emma could forget the wounds they had inflicted on each other, the scars serving as a permanent reminder of what had been lost. 2 years had passed since Emma had stormed out of her family home, and life had taken her on a relentless downward spiral. The independence she had longed for came at a steep cost. She lived in a cramped, one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city, its peeling paint and faulty heating system a reflection of her crumbling life. Every day was a struggle just to make ends meet. She juggled an exhausting array of odd jobs, waitressing at a dingy diner in the mornings, cleaning office buildings at night, and occasionally taking on freelance design gigs that paid far less than they were worth. Emma was exhausted, physically and emotionally. The weight of her choices bore down on her every single day. Each shift felt like a marathon, each rejection from a potential client a fresh blow to her already fragile self-esteem. Despite her best efforts, her finances were perpetually on the brink of collapse. Rent was often late, her utilities were frequently threatened with disconnection, and her meals consisted of cheap, packaged noodles or leftovers from the diner. Her friends became her lifeline. Sarah, her closest confidant from her days in the city, often brought over groceries when Emma's fridge was bare. Ben, another friend, offered to let her crash at his place when her landlord threatened eviction after a missed payment. They stood by her, lending their ears and their support when she needed it most. But no amount of encouragement from them could erase the gnawing sense of failure that plagued her. One night, after finishing a grueling 16-hour day split between her jobs, Emma sat at her tiny kitchen table, staring at her dwindling bank balance on her laptop. The numbers blurred as tears filled her eyes. She hated herself for even considering it, but she knew she had no other option. Her pride had kept her from doing it for years, but desperation had a way of breaking down walls. She called Jessica. The phone rang a few times before Jessica's voice, cold and formal, came through the line. "Hello?" Emma hesitated, the words catching in her throat. "Jessica, it's me. I need your help." There was a pause. Emma could almost hear Jessica's disapproval through the silence. "What kind of help?" Emma swallowed her pride and forced the words out. "I need some money. Just enough to cover rent for this month. I swear I'll pay you back as soon as I can." Jessica's laugh was sharp and bitter. "You've got to be kidding me, Emma. After everything, you're coming to me for money?" Emma's face burned with shame, but she pressed on. "I wouldn't ask if I wasn't desperate. Please, Jessica. Just this once." Jessica's voice turned colder. "Do you know how many times I've bailed you out in the past? I'm not doing it again. Maybe this is what you need to finally grow up?" Emma's heart sank. "I've been trying, Jessica. I'm working 3 jobs. I'm doing everything I can." Jessica cut her off. "And whose fault is it that you're in this situation? You made your choices, Emma. Don't expect me to clean up your mess." The conversation ended abruptly, leaving Emma staring at her phone in disbelief. She had known Jessica wouldn't make it easy, but the outright rejection still stung deeply. 4 days after, the humiliation of begging her sister for help and being dismissed so cruelly replayed in her mind like a broken record. But something shifted in Emma after that call. Her anger at Jessica turned inward, becoming fuel for change. She resolved to prove Jessica wrong, to rebuild her life without anyone's pity or handout. It wasn't easy. The exhaustion from her grueling jobs took its toll, and there were nights when she cried herself to sleep, wondering if she would ever escape the cycle of struggle. Then, one day, a sliver of hope appeared in the form of a job listing. A small publishing house was looking for a junior designer to join their team. The position paid modestly, but it came with stability, a steady paycheck, health benefits, and the opportunity to use her skills again. Emma spent the next 3 days perfecting her portfolio and preparing for the interview. She borrowed a blazer from Sarah, spent hours rehearsing her answers in front of the mirror, and showed up to the interview with a mix of determination and nerve. To her astonishment, she got the job. The first few weeks were overwhelming. Emma was rusty, having spent so much time away from the design world, and she often second-guessed herself. But her colleagues were kind, offering guidance and support as she found her footing. Slowly but surely, Emma began to regain her confidence. She took pride in her work, pouring her creativity into book covers and promotional materials. For the first time in years, Emma felt a sense of stability. She was able to pay her rent on time, buy groceries without fear of running out of money, and even start saving a little. Her apartment, though still modest, began to feel like a home as she added small touches. A new lamp here, a framed piece of her own artwork there. Despite her progress, Jessica remained a sore spot. They hadn't spoken since the phone call, and Emma doubted they ever would. She still carried the weight of Jessica's words, the constant reminders of her failures. But as the months went by, Emma began to realize that her worth wasn't tied to Jessica's approval. One evening, as she sat at her desk working on a particularly challenging project, Emma received a text from Sarah. "Proud of you, you're killing it." Emma smiled, tears pricking her eyes. She thought back to how far she had come since leaving her parents' house. The journey had been brutal, marked by humiliation and hardship, but she had survived. More than that, she was thriving. And though the scars of her past, her fallout with Jessica, the years of struggle, would always remain, Emma began to see them not as marks of failure, but as proof of her resilience. She had rebuilt her life piece by piece, not for anyone else, but for herself. And that, she realized, was her greatest accomplishment yet. Jessica had never expected her carefully constructed world to crumble the way it had. For years, she had prided herself on her financial stability, her careful planning, and her unshakable independence. But life, with all its unpredictability, had thrown her a curveball she hadn't anticipated. Her daughter, Sophie, had been diagnosed with a condition that required urgent medical treatment, and the bills were piling up faster than Jessica could manage. Insurance covered some, but not all, and she found herself staring at a $1,500 bill she couldn't pay. Jessica, who had always been the one others turned to for help, now found herself on the other side. Swallowing her pride, she picked up her phone and hesitated for a long moment before dialing Emma's number. She hadn't spoken to her sister in years, not since that bitter argument when Emma had asked for help and been turned away. The memory of Emma's tearful voice, pleading for support, lingered in Jessica's mind as she pressed the call button. But Jessica told herself it was different this time. This wasn't about recklessness or irresponsibility. This was for her daughter. Emma answered after a few rings, her voice steady but cautious. "Jessica?" This is unexpected. Jessica exhaled sharply. I need to talk to you. It's important. Emma paused, and Jessica could feel the weight of her sister's hesitation through the silence. Finally, Emma said, "What is it?" Jessica launched into her explanation, her words coming out in a rush. "It's Sophie. She's been sick, and we've been dealing with some unexpected medical expenses. I need $1,500 to cover her treatment. I wouldn't be asking if it wasn't serious." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Jessica's heart pounded as she waited for Emma's response. When Emma finally spoke, her tone was measured but firm. "You need money from me?" Jessica bristled at the way Emma said it, as if the idea were absurd. "Yes," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I wouldn't ask if I didn't need it." Emma let out a dry laugh. "That's interesting. You know, it wasn't so long ago that I needed help and came to you." "Do you remember what you said to me, Jessica?" Jessica stiffened, her cheeks flushing with a mix of embarrassment and frustration. "Emma, this isn't the time to dig up the past. This is about Sophie." Emma's voice sharpened. "Oh, I remember. You told me I needed to grow up and deal with my own mess. You called me reckless and irresponsible, and you refused to help me when I was on the verge of losing everything. And now you expect me to forget all of that and bail you out?" Jessica's temper flared. "This is different. I didn't put myself in this situation. This is about my child. Don't you think that's more important than whatever grudge you're holding?" Emma's laugh was cold, almost bitter. "Different? You think it felt any less urgent when I was about to lose my apartment? You think I didn't feel desperate when you shut me down? I had no one, Jessica. No one except my friends, because my own sister thought I wasn't worth helping." Jessica clenched her fists, her anger bubbling over. "So this is revenge, is that it? You're going to let Sophie suffer just to make a point?" Emma's voice grew steadier, more resolute. "This isn't revenge, Jessica. It's me setting boundaries. You've spent years looking down on me, judging me, and now you want me to save you? No. I'm not going to let you use me." Jessica's humiliation was palpable. She could feel her composure slipping, her desperation leaking into her voice. "I'm not trying to use you, Emma. I'm asking for help, for Sophie. She's your niece. And I needed help from my sister," Emma snapped. "But you didn't care. You made it very clear that I was on my own, and guess what? I figured it out. So will you?" Jessica was stunned into silence for a moment, her mind racing. She had come into this conversation expecting resistance, but not this level of cold resolve from Emma. It was like talking to a stranger. "You're being selfish," Jessica spat, her voice trembling with anger. "I thought you'd changed, but clearly, you're still the same self-centered brat who only cares about herself." Emma didn't flinch. "You can call me selfish if that helps you sleep at night, Jessica. But I'm not the one who turned her back when her own sister was drowning. Don't come crying to me now because you're finally getting a taste of what it feels like." Jessica's humiliation deepened. For years, she had held the moral high ground in their family, priding herself on being the responsible one, the dependable one. But now, standing on the receiving end of Emma's rejection, she felt exposed, small, vulnerable, and powerless. "Fine," Jessica said, her voice low and bitter. "I see how it is. Don't worry, Emma. I'll remember this." Emma's voice softened, but only slightly. "I'm sure you will. Just like I remember everything you said to me when I needed you most. Maybe now you'll understand what it feels like to be dismissed." Jessica hung up without another word, her hands trembling as she set the phone down. The weight of the rejection hit her like a tidal wave. She had always thought of herself as the stronger, more capable sister, but now she felt utterly defeated. She had to find another way to pay Sophie's bills, but the sting of Emma's words lingered, cutting deeper than she cared to admit. As for Emma, the call left her shaken but resolute. She hated the idea of refusing to help Sophie, but she knew this wasn't just about the money. It was about standing up for herself, about refusing to let Jessica trample over her boundaries again. For too long, she had let her sister's judgment define her, and she wasn't going to let that happen anymore. The rift between them grew wider that day, the scars of their past deepening into wounds that might never heal. Jessica, once so certain of her place in the world, was left to grapple with her newfound vulnerability, while Emma, for the first time in her life, stood firm in her own strength. Neither sister emerged from the confrontation unscathed, but both walked away with a grim understanding of how far they had drifted from each other, and how much they had lost along the way. In the years that followed, Emma's life transformed in ways she never could have imagined during those dark days of struggle. With each passing month, her confidence in her work as a designer grew. The publishing house she worked for recognized her talent and passion, promoting her to a senior position where her designs began to grace the covers of best-selling novels. She threw herself into her work, her creativity finally finding the outlet it had long yearned for. Her reputation in the industry flourished, and with it came new opportunities. Networking events, invitations to collaborate on high-profile projects, and, most importantly, financial security. But Emma's growth wasn't limited to her career. The same determination that had helped her build her professional life spilled into her personal life. She rekindled old friendships that had been strained or neglected during her years of struggle. Her friends welcomed her back with open arms, supporting her as she rebuilt not just her life but her sense of self. For the first time in years, Emma felt genuinely happy and at peace. On weekends, she often spent time with Sarah and Ben, the two friends who had stood by her through the toughest moments of her life. Their unwavering support had been a lifeline, and Emma never forgot it. She also began to explore hobbies she had long set aside, like painting and photography, rediscovering the joy of creating for herself rather than for a paycheck. Her apartment, once a symbol of her struggle, had become a sanctuary. She decorated it with care, filling it with plants, artwork, and personal touches that made it feel warm and inviting. It was a far cry from the cramped, lifeless space she had first moved into, and it reflected the person Emma had become, resilient, independent, and full of hope. Jessica, however, remained a shadow of her former self. After Emma exposed her lies to the family, Jessica retreated further into isolation. She refused to acknowledge her mistakes or take responsibility for the damage she had caused, instead blaming Emma for her alienation. Jessica cut herself off from most of the family, her pride too great to allow her to face their judgment. The once pragmatic, dependable sister who had always prided herself on her control now seemed adrift, weighed down by her own bitterness. Jessica's financial troubles only deepened. Her mounting debts became a constant source of stress, and her attempts to maintain her old image of stability crumbled. She avoided family gatherings whenever possible, and when she did attend, her presence was tense and uncomfortable. The family, once enamored with Jessica's reliability, had turned their attention to Emma, whose resilience and success were now admired. Jessica couldn't bear the shift, and each gathering only served as a reminder of how much she had lost, not just in reputation, but in the relationships she had taken for granted. Emma, for her part, chose to draw firm boundaries. She made it clear that while she would remain polite to Jessica at family events, she had no intention of rekindling their relationship. It wasn't out of malice but self-preservation. Emma had spent too many years trying to please a sister who never saw her as enough, and she refused to let herself fall back into that toxic dynamic. At family gatherings, their interactions were civil but distant. Emma would greet Jessica politely, ask about Sophie, and then focus her attention on other relatives. She took great care to ensure that Sophie, who was blameless in their feud, never felt the tension between them. Emma continued to send thoughtful gifts to her niece on birthdays and holidays, maintaining a connection that was free of the resentment that marked her relationship with Jessica. Jessica, however, seemed unable, or unwilling, to move on. She avoided meaningful conversations with Emma, her bitterness seeping into every interaction. While the rest of the family celebrated Emma's accomplishments and praised her for overcoming so much, Jessica sat silently, her resentment growing with each passing year. But she couldn't bring herself to apologize or take responsibility for the choices that had led to her isolation. The family, once fractured by Jessica's favoritism and Emma's struggles, began to rally around Emma. Their parents, in particular, expressed regret for the way they had handled things in the past. Their father, once so quick to dismiss Emma's challenges, now admired her strength and resilience. Their mother, who had often tried to placate Jessica at Emma's expense, made a conscious effort to support Emma's journey. Emma, while appreciative of their efforts, didn't let herself dwell on the past. She had learned the hard way that holding on to old wounds only prolonged the pain. Instead, she focused on building the future she wanted, a future free from the toxic dynamics that had once held her back. There were moments, of course, when the pain of her estranged relationship with Jessica resurfaced. Family was family, and no amount of success or personal growth could entirely erase the ache of losing a sister. But Emma reminded herself that she had done everything she could to bridge the gap. Jessica's refusal to change wasn't her responsibility. One summer evening, as Emma hosted a small dinner party at her apartment, surrounded by friends who had become her chosen family, she felt a deep sense of contentment. The laughter, the warmth, the sense of belonging, it was everything she had fought so hard to achieve. For the first time in a long time, Emma realized she was truly happy. Jessica, meanwhile, spent that same evening alone in her quiet house. The walls that had once seemed comforting now felt suffocating, and the silence was a constant reminder of the relationships she had pushed away. Yet, even as she sat with her regrets, Jessica couldn't bring herself to pick up the phone and call Emma. Her pride wouldn't allow it. As the years went on, the distance between the sisters remained. Emma continued to thrive, her life a testament to the strength it took to cut out toxicity, even when it came from family. She built a life filled with love, creativity, and peace, proving to herself, and to everyone else, that she was capable of more than anyone had ever given her credit for. Jessica, on the other hand, remained trapped in the cycle of her own making. Her unwillingness to face the truth kept her isolated, a far cry from the woman who had once prided herself on her control. And though the family tried to reach out, Jessica's bitterness only pushed them further away. In the end, Emma's journey wasn't just one of survival, it was one of triumph. She had reclaimed her life, her happiness, and her sense of self, free from the shadows of her past. And while Jessica's path remained uncertain, Emma knew that she had done everything she could to break free from the toxic dynamics that had once defined their relationship. For Emma, that freedom was the greatest victory of all.